start by saying that today is to make a decision to adopt the consultation document for the long-term plan. Not to argue it, just to adopt the consultation document. This is the second stage gate in this long-term process. The first was in December last year when we all agreed on what was going to be in the long-term plan that we could put out to consultation. This stage is a process step to make sure that the words and details that have been put together by our staff to explain the content of the documentation is concise, clear and easy for people to understand, and that the language is fair and balanced. There is still the last stage to come when we all take the feedback and all the advice we receive and make the final decisions about what is in or out of the long-term plan. That's some time away. I'd like to thank the staff in council and in the CCOs that have spent thousands of hours on this, including late nights and weekends. It's not easy to put together a document that describes a 10-year plan to spend many billions of dollars. And just think about things for a minute. We have to try and explain how this organisation will not only spend billions of dollars, but how we'll get value for that spending, and of course how we get that revenue in the door in the first place. There's no magic money tree, and none of these decisions will be easy. We've taken a very different approach to developing this LTP compared to the past, and this time we are presenting a range of choices for Aucklanders to have a say on this consultation document. The central proposal will deliver my vision of making the most of what we already have: affordable, resilient and future-focused infrastructure services and funding tools. This LTP for me is about strengthening the physical and financial resilience of the city, which was tested last year. However, we want Aucklanders to have their say if they want council to spend less, spend more, do less, spend less, or do more and spend more. These choices will have a direct impact on rates increases and service levels. Nothing's free. I'm proposing a reduction in operating costs across the council group that is effectively keeping these costs below inflation in real terms. I would have liked our central proposal to have lower rate increases in line with inflation, but we made choices in the past, like borrowing to fill part of our budget holes, that has meant that we need to plug the gap this year with bigger rate increases. We knew this would happen when those decisions were made, but we chose that option, and paying for the storm recovery work is not cheap. My proposal, which is now a central proposal for the consultation, is for a rates increase in year 1 of 7.5%, which drops in year 2 to 3.5%, is some of the lowest of all the major councils in New Zealand. Wellington is proposing 15% next year, Christchurch 15.8% and Hamilton 25.5%. We made our decision in December last year that we were going to include a mix of spending, revenue, debt and big strategic asset options that can put Auckland Council Group on the path to financial and physical resilience, and on track to bring rates increases in line with inflation by year 4 of the LTP. Let's not lose sight of the fact that we're still in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Maybe last year we were still hoping that this situation would improve quicker, but that's clearly not happening. All the pundits, from the economists, central bankers, Treasury and even the media, are telling us this is going to be a long, hard struggle against high inflation and interest rates. Look at the recent headlines of big companies in New Zealand announcing earning downgrades, disappointing results or missing analysts' forecasts. It's a brave person that is betting that this doesn't happen to us. It's time to take our rose-tinted glasses off. We've had our challenges through this process that has made it more difficult. We started with legislation that told us that we need to leave Three Waters out of our LTP. Then we had a change in government who told us we must have it in. As of last week, new legislation tells us we have to include water in our LTP. Because of all that, our auditor is not giving us a full assurance of the consultation document, but they have been across the content and have not identified any issues, which they noted at the Audit and Risk Committee yesterday. We also have had legal compliance sign-off. We've also included assumptions in our LTP about the regional fuel tax revenue for the next 2 years. Now they've had to come out too. It's no wonder with all this mucking around that 15 councils around the country have been put on negative credit watch. This includes the likes of Dunedin and Greater Wellington Regional Council. Luckily for us, our LTP has a credible central proposal with options. If we don't put all the options on the table, we'll be limiting ourselves to reach further into our ratepayers' empty pockets to pay for things or cutting the infrastructure we need to make our city more resilient. Just look what happened here in Auckland in the last 13 months. Did anyone imagine the floods, the cyclone, the major sewer collapses all happening? And don't get me started about trains. Not all of you agree with everything that is in the consultation document. I know that. I get it. I would rather we had enough money to spend on all the things we want to do and not make hard trade-offs to do them. But we all sat through 40 plus workshops that told us that is not possible. So we made a decision to consult on a central option and then choices. I think this consultation document and the supporting information is good work that the public should now see and have their say on. It may not be perfect, but editing every word today will not make it perfect. You've had an opportunity to provide some feedback after last week's workshop. A number of you have, both at the workshop and afterwards, offered that advice, so I'm confident that those changes are now reflected in the document you have before you. Tamsin will address us on those. No one has since raised anything else before this morning, so I'm hopeful that we can be out of here by lunchtime. Now I'm going to move the recommendation on the screen, which is that we adopt the consultation document for the long-term plan of this year and adopt the supporting information for the long-term plan and delegate responsibility to the Chair of the Budget Committee and the Group Financial Officer to approve any final edits required to the consultation document and supporting information for the long-term plan in order to finalise the documents for uploading online and physical distribution. I've got a second. Greg Sayers, are you out there?
He's still not here, apologies.
Apology yet so far. Well, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, thank you. And now, I'm sure you all know that Standing Order 1.5.3 intimately, that amendments to motions must be done in writing. This must be done easier, make it much easier for the staff. But now it's over to Tamsin and the team to lead us through this. Tamsin, this is your life.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Mayor. Tēnā koutou katoa. So today's item is a procedural one in this process for the long-term plan for the 10-year period between 2024 and 2034. The report on the agenda sets out the process as it relates to the drafting of the consultation material, and I would like to briefly highlight some of those steps now ahead of your discussion and decision making. So last year in December, you debated and agreed 2 regional items for consultation. From there, staff have been busy drafting material in line with those decisions to meet our statutory obligations to provide for consultation material to support consultation with Aucklanders during the month of March. At the same meeting, you also agreed to the Comms and Engagement Plan, which sets out the approach to consultation, including details that relate to our obligations to provide for a special consultative process. Following that December meeting, the government announced that it would repeal water services legislation and that they would provide for provisions to include water services in the long-term plan, as well as other provisions that relate to the preparation of our long-term plan. That bill has since passed and is now law. In my report, you will note that we opted to use the provision to proceed with an unaudited consultation document. However, we continue to work with our auditors to support their control checks, and this includes their review and input into the drafting of the consultation material in front of you today. In my report, I also mentioned the recent announcements from central government to pass legislation that would remove regional fuel tax funding. As a result, we have included appropriate disclosures as to the potential impact of the removal of RFT funding for our transport program, and also built in assumptions that relate to regional fuel tax. Last week, we held a workshop with you to discuss the draft material. We received some really great feedback during that session, and between last Wednesday and Friday, we have worked to incorporate your feedback into the version of the documents that was distributed to you on Friday and Saturday. Of note, we made changes to the use of the word core through the document, changes to the Auckland Future Fund and Ports of Auckland sections to give better effect to the decisions that you made last year, and also the North Harbour Stadium proposal, also to give better effect to the decisions that you made last year. We have also made it more explicitly clear that that particular proposal is a high-level one that would require further consultation if you made the decision to proceed with the redevelopment option. Since we distributed documents on Friday and Saturday, we have also made a few minor changes in response to our final Q&A checks, feedback from legal, and also our auditors. So I have copies of the final documents with those changes incorporated, and we'll table these documents for this meeting to be attached to the minutes of today's meeting. I have also distributed a table of changes with those last minute changes set out, as well as what is up on your screen. So on this slide here, we have Audit New Zealand feedback. So this was received on Saturday, and on Friday, and we have worked through these changes this weekend. They are set out in the table in front of you under audit feedback. They are relatively small and minor in terms of the changes that we have made. We have also made a few changes in response to the legal advice that we received when we were seeking legal compliance, and as the Mayor stated before, we have received legal compliance confirmation that the documents in front of you today are compliant with legislation. For the first option, as it relates to North Harbour Stadium, we just added some clarification that options 1 and 2 also are open to the third option, which is changes to the operational management of the stadium. And then in the second point there under Portland, we just added some clarification that there is supporting information as it relates to the Flagstaff report. So we added a reference to that in our supporting information as it supports the impacts of the Bledisloe terminal transfer. Yesterday, we went to the Audit and Risk Committee to provide a report on the controls, risks and mitigations as it relates to this part of the process. We received 2 suggestions from committee members. One was that we add some wording into the consultation document that talks about the legal review that we undertook in terms of internal and external review of the material, and so we have added that in under the About This document section. The second suggestion was that we include an assumption in our supporting information around unforeseen events in light of, the recent storm events and also, of course, the global pandemic that both had impacts on our planning for budgets. So that has also been included in the supporting information. Up on the screen here are the resolutions from the Audit and Risk Committee. The one I think that relates most to this particular committee and to this process was that the committee agreed to advise you that that effective controls and risk management processes have been followed during the preparation of consultation material for the long-term plan for 2024 to 2034. That is it from me in terms of providing an introduction to this item. I'm happy to take any part along with my colleagues, Mr. Mayor.
Deputy Mayor's first questions, please.
Thank you. Look, whilst I haven't got to the lofty heights of a gold card yet, I did have to go and get some glasses to read some of the small print. Can you tell me if the version that we've got that has 2 pages per A4 page, are they blown up into a larger version, or is it the small? Because it's a hang of a lot of words and it's very, very tiny, and I'm very conscious that for those who do not have access to online opportunities. It's very tiny, so the print is very small. So can you give me some confidence that it meets the sort of regulations around a good size factor, especially for the over 65s?
Thank you for the question, Deputy Mayor. Just to clarify, it's one page, one A4 page for print. We also have easy reader summary documents that are much larger font. They're full of infographics to help those who would struggle with a small print. But we can also look at other options in terms of being able to print larger font at our libraries for those who would like to access things.
I just think that's important, Your Worship. You know, it is a lot of words. I've done a few of these, and this has probably got more words than normal. No, not normal, but it has more words in it than we have traditionally had, potentially. So I just think, you know, to be able to read them is important, especially in hard copy if they're going to be in libraries and our service centres, etc.
I'm happy to follow up with that directly with our team. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'd like people to read them. Okay, there don't seem to be any more questions. Oh, yes, there are. Councillor Watson, please.
Yeah, a couple of questions for the team on some of the changes that have been made with respect of North Harbour Stadium. The first one to do with the choice of the word deconstruction. It's a rather unusual choice of word. Deconstruction, you know, is usually a word used in literary terms for taking apart or examining composition of material. It's not one that's usually used in this instance. Why wasn't the word demolition used, which is the word that Auckland Unlimited use in some of their own documentation, along with the $20 million cost that would go to demolition? Why was it deconstruction, not demolition? Because that's what they're proposing.
We'll just see if we can, if we've got someone from TAU that's able to address that question and about the differences between deconstruction and demolition. Have we got someone online? Justine, maybe? Somewhat.
Good morning, everyone. Justine will be online shortly. I think the key difference there is we've tended to not use demolition when the intention is to potentially recycle material, if that is the choice to go ahead with that plan, or a plan that requires a demolition of the stadium. So that's just the key difference.
So the stadium is going to one of the council recycling centres or something, is it? Chunks of it?
No, I mean, I suppose I can relate it to similar to the, Category 3 buyouts, where we've tried to, where properties are demolished, the councils and mayors been pretty clear on, that, some of that material could be repurposed rather than just going to waste. So that's the intention of using deconstruction instead of demolish.
And just to confirm, we do use that in reference to our Category 3 homes as well. So we
Okay, well, I guess we're going out to the public. It's clear to me a far more appropriate word for the public in this instance would be demolition. You could have made that point, but I don't really want to go too much at the officers here, because you've tried to do the best within the information you've given. However, I'm concerned with some other information that is a little misleading, and that's the following statement. If, as a result of this consultation, Council elects to proceed with option 2, an advisory group of North Harbour Stadium partners and community representatives will develop options for the potential redevelopment. And I stress the word there, as a result of consultation. Is anyone in the council aware that that such a group has already been set up, that they're having meetings before the consultations even started with respect of the demolition option? And I quote from a correspondence that was made aware to me, This commitment would include attendance at a minimum of 2 workshops between March and June, as well as time outside of these meetings to review documentation generated from the group's work. Do you not think there runs a risk of the perception of predetermination, where before the consultations even begun a group's meeting, a rather limited selection of individuals on this group, I might add, with a view to considering one of the options that hasn't even been consulted on yet?
I believe that Justine from TAU is online.
Right.
Kia ora, Justine.
Yes, I am on. Absolutely aware of the risk around predetermination, and essentially what we're trying to do is to gather some sort of options or analysis which can feed into the consultation after the decision around which option is to be pursued, once we've got that back. But what we don't want to do is start from a completely standing start when we get that consultation material back. But no decisions can be made or will be made until the consultation is done, and then any pre-work that's been done by this group can be added to that mix and then continue to be worked on. We are very cognizant of not predetermining any outcome until that consultation process has been completed. But what we don't want to do is lose a couple of months and effectively have to start with a standing start then.
So why is this group just looking at the one option then?
No, this group is looking at so the options as they're outlined. One, what the concept is to trying to get an understanding of what might be desirable to the community, so that we can actually start to understand what that could look like.
The group's only looking at the one option. That's the option 2. That's the demolition option. They say that in the letter. This one, to redevelop the precinct to better deliver for the needs of the North Shore community.
So the other option, though, is the option around status quo.
There's no reference to that at all in this letter to people.
No, but if you are looking to do something different than what is there now, there has to be some discussion around what would different look like. What could that be?
So you can't
group
wait
is
a
trying
month
to
to do
start
that?
looking at that.
You can't wait till after the give the public the courtesy of the consultation before you start looking at your preferred option?
So sorry, this is not to develop a preferred option. This is just to canvass to understand what potential options it may be, with no decisions at all, because ultimately the consultation will lead us into where does the public want us to go to. What we didn't want to do is to hear back from the public and then work from a standing start. What we thought would be a good idea is to use the intervening time to at least canvass some of the local community and some of the individuals known around that local community to understand what their preferences and desires might be, but with absolutely no decision-making powers whatsoever for that group, as is clear in the terms of reference.
That might well be the case if it wasn't for the fact that Auckland Unlimited have already, in some of their board papers last year, declared their view and their preference in option B, and that's on the public record. My question to the council legal team is then, given that Auckland Unlimited are actually identified in one of the options by implication, option 3, change the operational management of North Harbour Stadium, in terms of perceived conflict of interest, should they be involved then in developing another option in which their continued operation or presence or influence is heightened? So they're actually the subject of one of the options. Is it appropriate for them then to be involved in actually developing another option during the consultation period? So that's a question for the council legal in terms of perception of conflict of interest.
So if I could just add something there though, TAU officers are not contributing to the group, we're supporting the group, but ultimately the group is not TAU officers, in the same way that we also have some representatives from the Mayor's office supporting that group. The actual discussion is a number of individuals from the North Shore community.
So I see the chair of this group is is a director of Auckland Unlimited.
In North Shore, also a North Shore resident, yes.
And I see that representative members for Auckland Council in the group include another board director of Auckland Unlimited and the chief executive of Auckland Unlimited. So I don't think I'll be classifying them as non-members. They appear to have full membership from this. Full members of the advisory group. Two Auckland Unlimited board directors and their chief executive. It's here in black and white.
For an advisory group,
members.
yes.
Full members.
With no decision-making
Okay.
powers.
All right, so I asked the question of legal then in terms of perception of conflict of interest when we have a council CCO that's actually involved in one of the options that's getting put out there. Is it appropriate conduct for them to be in the middle of the consultation or before the consultation's even begun, leading the work on another option? To me, that's a clear conflict of interest.
Good morning, and thank you for the question. So the issues before you are those three options, and the people who will take a decision on the three options, including the change of management, are you as the council. Those options and that decision will be taken by you at the end of this process. What we're talking about with TAU is a separate process to consider options, to consider views post that decision making ultimately. As TAU have explained, they have started it early, but it won't have any impact until afterwards. And those three options, including the third option, are all open to you. In those circumstances, I don't think there's any significant legal risk associated with this approach.
Considering one option, not all options, option two, that's what their group is doing. Before, do you not think it would be more appropriate for them to wait a couple of weeks until the public consultation is over and the result of that consultation is known, rather than before it's even started? What do you think the public perception is of that?
I can advise on legal risk, and as I said, the decision about those three options sits with you. So in those circumstances, I don't have any further comment in relation to that.
Yeah. Okay, so what I'm signalling, Mr Mayor, here is I have some real concerns. I have highlighted them before, and I appreciate Tamsin for the follow-through that you've gone as far as you have. This is more directed at the entity that is driving this process in terms of this advisory group and the advice that is being put out. So in terms of informing option 3, for instance, the operational management of the North Harbour Stadium to ensure greater use by the community, there's no context provided at all, anywhere in any of the documentation, to the performance of North Harbour Stadium before RFA and Auckland Unlimited took over, which was characterised by a wide variety of content in All Black tests, rugby league tests, concerts, A-League soccer franchises. There's no mention of that, and the period subsequent to that, after 2014, when Auckland Unlimited RFA took over, and in particular the disastrous decision to basically demolish a section of the Western Grandstand. So there's not a reference to that in terms of the context of option 3. There's nothing on that option 3 at all. So I'm having real problems with the balance and the neutrality of the content that's being put out here. I've raised it in writing. It has been addressed in a number of superficial ways, but the overall flavour of the consultation, including the choice of phrases such as to better deliver for the needs of the North Shore community, it is loaded. As I pointed out, that hasn't been changed. We're actually talking more than the North Shore community. There's no mention of Hibiscus Coast, of the Northwest, of the North Harbour region in general. So the choice of words here are suboptimal, both in the use of that deconstruction, the reference only to North Shore, and in the loaded adjectives and adverbs that are used in that key phrase in the consultation material about delivering better for the needs of the North Shore. Whose opinion? That's an opinion, that's subjective. And for people that know little about the specifics of this, that's going to have an influence. So I'm highly concerned with the nature of what's going out here on North Harbour Stadium.
Okay, well, today's questions, it's not submissions. And you're all entitled to make a submission on everything, whether you're in agreement or not agreement with various parts of things. So we've got the questions and we've got the answers. We may not, I think we've taken the point. Councillor Walker.
So I won't repeat the questions that Councillor Watson has asked, but essentially my questions also go to, I would suggest, the lack of balance, the incomplete information concerning North Harbour Stadium, and consequently the ability of anybody in the community to make an informed decision. So I've got a particular question, and that goes to the additional information, which includes a profit and loss statement. And my question is around the further information that might be provided as to profit and loss, because all we've got is operating revenue, cost of sales, operating expenditure, net operating loss, of course. I think all of our stadiums make a net operating loss. May be mistaken there. Is it possible to have a breakdown of the revenue and the expenses, which, by the way, I've been asking for well over a decade now, so that it is possible for submitters to make an informed submission, especially when one of the options is around operational management. So how is it possible for anyone to make a submission around that might carry some weight if they haven't got access to the operational figures? So a specific question around supplying more information. Is that possible? And just for the record, I'm talking about historical information as much as anything, and I'm assuming that removes any need for any commercial sensitivity, and I'm mindful that there's almost nothing happening there now and hasn't been for some time, so why wouldn't we?
So in terms of financial information, there is financial information that's been provided in previous sessions. I think we've provided very detailed levels of capital investment breakdowns and the capital investment spend on an ongoing basis. I think one of the difficulties is understanding how to split the operating revenue by category and to take account of interactions like COVID and various other bits and pieces along the way. I'm not sure exactly what information the councillor is looking to have included in there.
Would you like me
especially given a change in operational management would incur different levels of expenditure and revenue?
So you have a stadium. You have an account system that has coding within it. So expenses, revenue are coded to specific accounts. You have that information. That information is included in SAP, which is council's system. So that information, for example, would cover off expenses of maintaining the grounds of the stadium, would cover off staffing, administration, a number of things. I shouldn't have to spell that out, but if anyone is submitting on an alternative to the current operation, surely they need that information, and you have that information. It is not contained in the information that is being provided. As I say, the profit and loss statement has got 1, 2, 3, 4 lines plus a subsidy per attendee. That's it. I'm sure if the mayor was interested in looking at a business, he'd want significantly more information than this. And this is a public business. In fact, it's run by a charitable trust. Can we have that information if you have it available?
Thank you, Councillor. The information around detailed historic financials has been provided to you as a councillor for a number of years past, which is split into the stadiums into various categories. The information is held in our system, Ungabok, which is one of the financial systems that the stadiums use. However, there is an allocative process that is used across all of the stadiums because we run 3 stadiums. And therefore, the allocative process doesn't necessarily take all of the shared costs as they relate to some of the management and some of the activities which are spread across the different sites. So it is difficult and arbitrary in terms of some of the allocative processes that you would use across the different stadiums.
Okay, through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not asking this information for myself. Any information I've received as an aside has been woefully inadequate anyway. This is information so that members of the public can make an informed submission around operational management matters and have the information, rather than a circumstance where we have absolute obfuscation. So I think I've made this request. I think it's reasonably easy.
Thank you, Councillor.
I'm sure Mr. Williamson would support me that we really should have this information.
Thank you for the comment and the questions. You're obviously well aware of the supporting data that has been provided within the supporting information because you've quoted the operating loss detail that is there. So the information on the supporting data from page 663 of the pack and then for quite a while covers off not just the financials but the utilisation, the capital requirements, the participation by schools, etc., and how that capital expenditure is planned. And I knew you'd be completely across that.
I can read, I've read that.
Yes, I understood that, and I said that you had indeed been quite across that. The view from myself is that we've presented the information in the time available that allows the question that is put forward in consultation and that councillors required of us back in December in the supporting information in enough detail for the public to be able to make their opinion heard. I understand you've got a difference of opinion on that, however, that is the position that I would hold.
No, if I could just add, in terms of what we are going out to consult on, anything that where we shift, if you made the decision to shift away from status quo, including operational management, would require further consultation. So at this stage, the level of information that we are providing to support the proposal that is included in consultation, we believe is an appropriate level of detail for the public to have their say, noting that if you made a decision to move away from status quo, we would be required to consult again.
Further question just on the profit and loss statement. Do these figures include depreciation and interest?
Page 633 indicates the net operating loss, which is an operating loss which will not include depreciation or interest.
Okay. The question I've got that goes to financials goes to the capital investment. And I note in 2020 there was capital investment of $3,800,000 odd. Would it be helpful to convey that that was associated with the disastrous decision to demolish part of the northern stand for the Tuataras, who, by the way, I don't think paid for 2 years? Would that be helpful?
So I believe you'll find there's an asterisk next to that figure, which actually then indicates below that it was invested in reconfiguring the stadium for additional sporting codes, which is the $2.5 million that you refer to.
I understand that.
So that has been indicated.
Would it be helpful to be a bit more explicit around that? And part of the reasoning for that is, given that one of the options is around alternative management and I would suggest that the management on the part of Auckland Unlimited has been abysmal. That is a fundamental decision that has severely impacted on the operational performance of the stadium. Is it possible to convey that information?
So, as indicated, it does include that there were specific changes of $2.5 million in terms of reconfiguring the stadium. As has already been discussed, the option around whether or not there is a change in operator is one of the things that we will get consultation back, and then from there more detailed analysis can be made. I think this is to give a level of detail which is suitable for the analysis for the conciliation that we're doing. It indicates the money has been spent. It indicates that it was around additional sporting codes.
The other question I've got just goes to the related matter that my fellow councillor John Watson has raised around deconstruction, which we certainly understand from our view is demolition. Is it not desirable to indicate the impact of this for the North Shore community? And what do I mean by that? I mean that compared to the past, when the stadium was well run, there will effectively be no large sporting or recreational activities north of the bridge. We won't have any international FIFA games, we won't have any rugby league of any substance, rugby, large concerts as occurred previously, Roger Waters and others at this stadium. So effectively nothing north of the bridge. And is not that a relevant consideration for part of Auckland that is expanding rapidly, that is certainly indicated in the information that's conveyed? Would it not be helpful to convey that information so that members of the public understand what the demolition of the stadium actually means to them?
So
can we convey that information?
Necessarily demolition of the stadium, it's around redevelopment of the precinct to better needs. What that then should do is determine what is the available options for what could be content in the future and what would be able to be done. I think it is too early and preemptive to suggest that things won't be hosted there. That is a level that has not yet been worked through. If the feedback that has been received back is around redeveloping the stadium precinct, then some of that will need to take into account what are the future desires of what is to be hosted over in the North Shore, and therefore we will need to make sure the facilities are suitable to be able to meet those requests.
I would contend, and it's in Tautaki Unlimited Zone information, that there won't be any of those things happening because you've actually stated it in previous supporting information. I'm certainly asking that it be made explicit so that people know. Otherwise, we're going out with a document that's so biased, so predetermined, that I doubt whether anybody could make an informed decision.
Through the chair, I just wanted to mention that the proposal that you're referring to isn't the proposal that you agreed to. In December it is different, and I don't think that we can conflate those two things. The information that we have included in the consultation material directly reflects those resolutions as agreed by the committee. Yeah, and at this stage, this proposal is incredibly high level, the one that you agreed to. And again, just want to point out that shifting away from status quo, if that was the decision that you make as a committee at the end of this process, we would have to undergo further consultation.
Okay, the other question I've got just goes to the graphs, the timelines that you produce. Given that the most relevant historical information, I'd suggest, aside from the very poor running of the stadium by Auckland Unlimited, is the previous management under the trust that the North Shore City Council set up, is it possible to inform people with that information? That is to go further back, because that is the period in time when the stadium was running very, very well. It had a lot of content. It was building up a reserve fund of some millions of dollars, which is also not mentioned. Is it possible to convey that information?
Through the Chair, again, I'd just like to refer to the resolutions that this committee passed, is changing the operational management of North Harbour Stadium to ensure greater use by the community, note not to ensure better financial management. And so the information that we have included in the consultation document to support this proposal is in line with that resolution. And as I mentioned before, if you make the decision to proceed with anything other than status quo, further information will need to be provided and we will need to consult again with the community. At this stage, we are comfortable with the level of detail that we have provided to support the proposal that is included in consultation material.
Do you think that somebody who's resident on the North Shore, particularly one of the many thousands of people that donated to the building of the stadium, do you think they would like to have some information on that period of time so that they've got a basis of comparison?
I think we've answered the question fully around what we have in the consultation document, the supporting information, and why.
Okay, the other question I've got is just another financial question. It's on capital investment. So of the amount of capital investment that's forecast around option 1, it goes to property renewals. That amounts to about 40 odd million out of the 33 million. Is it possible to have a breakdown of that? It doesn't have to be to the nth degree, but again, so that people are informed as to the spending required for the stadium, and that would also inform the management of the stadium. Is it possible to have that information? It's referenced as being in the asset register.
Again, it also references that that's approximately 4,000 individual components, and one of the questions becomes the balance of the information required to support the consultation of what we are consulting on versus a more in-depth financial analysis of all of the property renewals, which span a range of things. We've itemised the large numbers, but deliberately sort of kept the smaller numbers into one big consolidation group because there's literally too many to put into this consultation document.
Okay, thank you very much for the lack of answers to my question.
I think you're probably underestimating the people's ability
Point of order,
to
Mayor.
make a decision.
Point of order on, and my point of order are either on disorder, language or irrelevance, but the councillor just said thanks for the lack of answers or something. The constant stream of questions, you can disagree with the advice, but the constant way the questions are being asked, how they're being asked, and the sort of words coming out against staff is not appropriate. And I think if it continues over the course of this meeting, it will get worse. So can we just watch that behaviour? Staff are trying to give advice.
Give that advice, but I don't think we should underestimate the public's capacity to read these documents and make their own. I actually want to hear from the public. That's what the point of consultation is, and I'm sure the people on the North Shore are well aware of the strengths and weaknesses of whatever is over there, and similarly the people of other parts of the district will have their strong views, and so we'll move to Councillor Henderson and hear strong views about West Auckland.
Strong views about many things, Mr. Mayor. I've got a couple of questions, but first and foremost, I just want to ask about paragraph 34, the loss of the regional fuel tax. Announced right as the document was being drafted, and you guys were working very late hours at that time, I'm sure, to get it together. How did that impact your consultation document?
Yes, so the timing of that made it challenging for feeding that into this consultation document. So the government decision was to end the fuel tax 4 years early. What we'd assumed when you agreed a budget for consultation back in December was that to make an assumption that the fuel tax would be ended after 2 years. At that time, government policy was announced that the fuel tax would come to an end, but it wasn't clear when that would occur, so we had to make assumptions. So the impact of that has basically been 2 years of $150 million of revenue not been achieved, plus matching co-funding, so it's $600 million of transport funding that is no longer available. It wasn't possible to go through, revise the capital program, work through detailed projects within the couple of weeks that we had to get a document in front of you for adoption today, having gone through the legal and audit requirements. So all we were able to do in the consultation document is to include these caveats, and you'll see these kind of boxes that call it out, that the transport program will have to be reviewed. There will be, based off the numbers and projects set out in here, there'll be 600 million of transport projects that won't be able to go ahead, and we'll have to work through that detail. Auckland Transport will need to review their program. It just hasn't been possible to do that by now, but between the draft and the final, there'll have to be work to work through that transport program. So all we can do is signal those impacts and work through that. Auckland Transport will have to do that as part of looking through their RLTP, and take into account any further changes in government policy around transport. So the timing has been challenging. We've done the best we can in the time frame.
Thanks. Just one more on those and then I'll move to a different topic. Thanks, Mayor. Feel free to not answer this. It might be an Auckland Transport question, but I'll just throw it out just in case. But how are the public going to have their say on the reprioritisation that will be involved in the loss of $600 million of public revenue?
So in the material here, we set out the priorities, the activities. There's a project list, and there's a specific question sort of asking for people about do you agree with the priorities in here? And this is calling for high-level feedback around what are the priorities and outcomes that you want, and the general level of investment for investment in transport over the next 10 years. There's another stage at the more detailed level, which is the RLTP, and that's when Auckland Transport will put together more information, and the public will have a much more detailed say on project by project stuff. So this is the high level consultation on broad transport size of budget and priorities, but then the specific project level prioritisation will be through the RLTP consultation.
Thank you, I really appreciate that. So moving on to my sort of second and final topic, and this might be a Peter Gudsell sort of line of questioning, but in previous terms we've had Section 17A value for money reviews, and we had an entire committee dedicated to it. Have value for money reviews been undertaken in advance of the release of this consultation document?
I had hoped that we'd instilled the thinking of value for money right across the thing rather than being a special committee. Value for money is at the very essence of the document, and that's why we've offered three options are low, medium and high, and so that we get the general flavour of whether people are interested more in money or things.
Given that the answer did come to me, the Section 17A, is there a continual rolling basis of reviews? And they need to come up every time you have a large contractual change coming through. So it's not a case of you rush something through for a long-term plan. They just continue to roll and they turn up with the appropriate recommendations at any point of time. In terms of expenditure control, there's a whole section within the supporting information around some of the budget responsibility and transparency rules and the way in which expenditure control and prioritisation is going to work within this long-term plan.
Thank you. Thanks for that. So at great staff time, the Revenue Committee directed staff to prepare Power BI data, which goes into sort of quite a deep level of detail in terms of council finances by department. Have staff been directed to use that Power BI data at all in preparing this document?
I'm not sure that we're...
By the Revenue Committee, sorry.
I'm not sure that we're ever particularly directed to a particular set of data to pull together the LTP. We use everything at our fingertips to pull together the information for the LTP. And again, I'd refer you to those sections on expenditure control and prioritisation, which talks about the operating cost and efficiency requirements within the LTP on both the parent and the council group.
Thanks. Just last one. So what direction have staff taken from the Revenue Committee in total in preparing this budget? With consultation.
I'm not aware of any resolutions that direct this particular process as it relates to the Revenue and Expenditure Committee, but someone else might have a different.
Thank you. Councillor Dalton, please.
Thank you. I just have a couple of questions around the major investment. The financial projections that we have there supporting the documentation, did the financial projections for the profitability and the dividends for Port of Auckland go to Port of Auckland to look at? Have they looked at them and said, yep, they look pretty good?
The source of that information is what Port of Auckland submitted through the budget process early on, so leading up to the mayoral proposal. It's their input that's come through. We haven't sought any other external advice or created our own numbers. We've just used their numbers that have fed into the LTP process.
In terms of the consultation document, and thank you for adding the sentence about cruise, I'm just going back to that information. I'm still not convinced there's enough information there for Aucklanders to make a decision on the return of Bledisloe to council within 15 years or up to 15 years. So there's no reason, there's no why. I'm trying to look for the problem we're trying to solve. Whereas we know that Port of Auckland do have plans for Bledisloe if they were certain of their footprint. How do Auckland, because I think it's challenging for councillors, how do Aucklanders make a decision with one set of information and not the other set of information?
So we've included the information that we consider as relevant for the decisions that were agreed to be consulted on, based off the mayoral proposal last year. The information has been reviewed by internal and external legal review and have had audit feedback. The key decisions around the port land is about the transfer of interest in freehold land between Port of Auckland and Auckland Council. And so because that's a strategic asset under our significance and engagement policy, there is a specific set of information requirements that we must include in the long-term plan around that. And so we've kind of included all the information relevant to that. I think there is a broader context of what may or may not happen with port, cruise ship terminals, all those things over the a 15-year kind of horizon. Some of that may be beyond the scope of this long-term plan. So we all of that information might be interesting, but it's kind of not key to the key legal matter that we're consulting on, and it's not required for this consultation document. A lot of it's uncertain. So we've kind of we've done the best we can with information that we've had to hand in the time frame, and the view was what we've got here is appropriate, relevant, and it's going to pass the legal and audit reviews.
I think that's the challenge, is that the audit and risk, what are the words that they use? It's a very high bar. It's the process. It's not, so when you come to talk to Aucklanders about it, it's a whole new level, but I'll save that for my debate, but thank you for your answers.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ferry, please.
Thank you. My questions are in relation to the Auckland Future Fund proposal. And apologies, I've lost the page now, but it does refer to the returns, the table that has the returns over time, the estimates laid out in it, and it refers to the gross proceeds, and then it takes out the reinvestment, and then the next line says that it's net. I'm wondering about the fund management costs. We've indicated elsewhere in the document that we're probably looking at external management of the fund. And also, I'd like to understand how the self-insurance aspect would potentially impact on what we would need in terms of returns, because the portion that's in self-insurance would need to be reasonably liquid and therefore would be likely to have lower returns. So it's likely we'd have to have some of the investments would need a much higher rate of return to cover that. So I'm wanting to understand more in that space, please.
I'll just talk briefly to the first question, then I'll pass over to John to talk about the second, or maybe add. So the assumptions and advice we had was that a reasonable rate of return over the long run for a growth fund that was sort of 80% towards growth assets and 20% towards income assets would be around 7.65%. We've reduced that a little bit to account for those kind of fees that you talked about. So net of sort of management fees, we've assumed 7.5% as the average long-term rate of return given the level of risk in that fund. So I'll pass across to John to talk about that, the self-insurance bit.
Yeah, thanks, Ross, and through you, Chair. So for the self-insurance fund, we have given some thought as to whether that would require a different asset mix for greater liquidity. The current thinking is probably not, and that's for two reasons. One is that, we saw with the large flooding events, again, the time between an event and actually fixing things tends to be quite some time. So you don't need to have huge amounts of the funds in cash. And also the plan would be through this investment to have it invested in funds themselves, which would themselves be quite liquid. So we'd be investing in much larger funds and be a very small portion of that fund, and therefore relatively easy to liquidate at short notice.
So thank you. With the proportion we're potentially looking for self-insurance, I think you said then it would be a relatively small portion of the overall fund. So is there a recommendation in that space?
Through you, Chair, the current thinking is that both the above and below ground property program would benefit most from having a much larger component of self-insurance, because that's where the bulk of the premium is tied up. Current thinking is that if we were to retain, let's say, the first $500 million of risk on each of those policies, so $1 billion in total, that would mean we'd have to allocate $1 billion or marginally more for the self-insurance part of that fund.
Okay, but if we're putting 3 billion, 4 billion in, that's like a quarter. That doesn't seem like a small portion to me. Am I getting my maths wrong?
No, you're through, Chair, so I guess if it's 4 billion, $1 billion would be 25%.
Okay. So just following up on the fund management fees aspect, what about the cost of the contract management within the council of those, of some of this? For example, if the port's leased out, we would wear a significant contract management cost. That's probably not in the future fund, sorry, that's probably more in the port space.
Yeah, I think that would be all part of the, the port lease proposal. And here we've got an assumption of 2.1 billion, but there's a range of 2 to 3 billion. There's lots of, we've disclosed a high level of uncertainty, and we've done a range of sensitivity analysis. So all of the costs, benefits around that would need to be worked through prior to implementation. So I'd say all those kind of costs would be, you'd have to consider that as part of what is the total value you might get out of an port lease.
So I guess the reason I'm raising it in the context of the future fund is any sort of, how would we pay for that contract management? Would we pay for it out of the future fund proceeds, in which case that reduces the net further?
Yeah, through you, Chair, I guess effectively that's how it would happen, but again, the costs of managing that sort of contract in the terms of a 2.1 estimated gain will be relatively small.
Okay. I'm not meaning to be unpleasant about this, but I did just ask what a small proportion was for the self-insurance, and it turned out to be 25%, so you'll forgive me if I'm a little bit unsure about what would constitute relatively small.
Yeah, through you, Chair, I can assure you it wouldn't be 25% of 2.1 billion.
Okay, so lower, though.
Much lower.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Councillor Hills, please.
Kia ora. Just a quick question for John while he's still here. Do you have, and I should have prefaced it earlier, off the top of your head, what percentage earnings from the dividends for the Auckland Airport we're projecting, if we kept those shares as they are? Online it says 1%, but I don't know if that's correct.
Yes, we're actually just looking for those figures now. Yeah, through Chair. So projected Auckland Airport dividends ranging from 27 million in financial year 26 up to 40 million in financial year 34.
And sorry, I should have, as a percentage, do you know? I could work it out on a calculator, don't worry. The question I do have then on local board funding, the FARA funding, which unfortunately, I will be honest, in the back of the documents in December, didn't quite get to the way it was laid out for each local board, but that information is not available, as far as I can see in the supporting information now, on the real impact of the FARA funding model for each board. Unless I'm missing it again, but I don't believe it points out in an easy way what that means.
It basically means there'll be some winners and some losers. And there'll be some smiling people and some frowning, I suppose. But we're trying to get a broad view across the whole city, that whether they think it's a good move or not. But Mr. Gudsall will respond.
I do believe there is some in there. So if you could have a quick glance to see if I'm correct. Page 559 of the supporting information document, section 7.1. It may be confusing with the graphs, but they are showing the existing funding gap and the funding gap after 3 years with that FARA funding. So hopefully that provides it by local board area.
I understand the gaps, but there was actually details of the over and unders, like some boards get 6 to 10 million extra, other boards get minus a couple of million, you know, like it shows the impact, but that isn't available, and it also doesn't show what the lower, central and more options would do within that. Those are two different data sets, but actually for local boards, that would be quite an important point to, say if they were advocating for higher or the central outcome.
In terms of the extra detail, in December, when the mayoral proposal came out, there was a lot of detailed information, so extensive attachments that had all those figures. So that is all out there on the public record, and we can point interested parties to that, you know, that detail that's already out there publicly. In terms of the do more, do less, I don't think we've done those calculations. The team might be able to.
If it's a redistribution, it should be neutral as to whether you do more or less.
Yep.
Because it's not affecting the overall funds up and down on the council. It's a matter of whether we redistribute fully as quickly or as slowly as we. And if we get feedback from the council, the public that they want to do it, there'll be a further debate amongst us as exactly how we do it.
It does say under the proposals, though, that the do less is quite dramatic, even more dramatic than the central option for some local boards. But the do more, I think, is not redistribution, it's actually fully funded equity.
Yep, yes, a good point. To clarify, what we've said, and there's two ways you can get the fund equity. One is reallocation, and the other one is put more money in. What we've got in the central proposal is a bit of both. What we've said that is if you went to the do less scenario, kept rates low, then what you might do is just have no extra money and just reprioritise. And that means that boards that have a disproportionate, too much funding, more than the equitable amount, they would all be reduced by a lot more to get to equity. If you went to the other extreme and under the do more scenario and at higher rates, you wouldn't have to rely on reprioritisation. You could just put more money into those boards that are underfunded without reducing anyone else. So you've got the how you get to equity could change in those different scenarios.
And thank you. And you led me to one last question, and it may be too late to delete one word. I did miss the one word last week, and I know that Councillor Ferry has concerns too. The word overfunding for some boards, I understand underfunding, but it's not really accurate to say some boards are overfunded. They have a funding attached to the assets they have, depreciation and renewal maintenance funding. We're looking to cut that funding, which will mean closure of some assets or something. But they're technically not overfunded. They are obviously funded more because they have more assets, whether that's their fault or not. They do have more assets, but depending on, it makes it look like they have got money to slosh around when in fact it is attached to assets they have in their ward or local board.
Yes, and so our response in the workshop last week is, yes, we don't mean they're overfunded and they've got far too much money. We mean that compared to an equity calculation, they've got more than they would get under a sort of pure formula. So it's relative to a fair an equity model. We did commit to go away and look at the wording and see if we can find some different language. I'm not 100% sure if that's been adjusted yet, but if it hasn't, we can do that under the editorial changes.
Yeah.
It doesn't change the intent of the policy, it's just making it a little clearer around the language.
Yeah. Even
so
if it said funded above the equitable or something, just to say overfunded actually tells quite a different story than the fact.
Yeah, we'll check that wording and we can make those editorial changes.
It's page 110.
Thank you. And just, I did ask in the workshop and it hasn't changed, and maybe because it's too complex, but the more or less central, is there any way to show, it almost looks binary, like 7 or 14, whereas some people might want more transport or more something, and it might mean 0.5% more. Is there any way to show what the estimates are for each of those, the tick boxes you get? So there's transport, water, community, etc., etc.
So sorry, just to clarify, so you're referring to the feedback form?
Yes.
So question 1B, what would you like Auckland Council to do more or less of?
Yes.
I guess we're leaving it at that higher level to enable you to give you that scope of consideration and final decision making in terms of where you set your rates, where you set your investment. And so keeping it at that level kind of enables people to, I guess, be more generic with their responses in terms of the areas they would like to see us spend more or less, or as proposed, and it kind of leaves those options to you at that later stage.
Okay, thank you, Matt. It might be good to have for us maybe later as part of the budget calculator or that type of thing, moving up transport a little bit and down another area might mean the rate stays the same, but it's almost like we're offering all or nothing. Thanks, Mayor.
We'll probably get 20,000 different permutations of that. And that's what we've been elected to do, is to hear that and make a decision. And I'm hoping that the wisdom of the crowd will do it for us. Councillor Darby, please.
Thanks, Mayor. I might just break this up. I might come back to the port ones because I'll just ask. First, was there consideration given to developing an index, considering it's a long document, something I asked at the workshop?
Yes, we've I think added at the back of the document a placeholder for a keyword index, so we'll do that last. So once the editorial changes are all finalised, this thing is adopted, because the page numbers can shift. So the very last thing we'll do is just update the keyword index so that people can see their keywords. Won't be every single word, but it'll be your key ones.
You're talking about the glossary there?
No, in addition to the glossary, we'll have a keyword index so people can look at where to find matters on key things.
Okay, so that'll be an improvement on finding where to go in the document. Okay, I'll leave it with
Correct, yeah.
Just in terms of water care, it's very short at page 94. Can I just check this? Because it is a significant number. At page 94, the water and wastewater tariffs going up by 25.8% on 1 July. Now, my understanding is, that is an absolutely considerable number and one that came to us quite recently, but it's the product of post the Three Waters environment. And I understand that it was a very much lower number if Three Waters had proceeded. I think it was in the vicinity of 2%. But I need to get that verified. I don't know who would have that, Ross or Peter. In the narrative there, we don't explain how that 25.8 has popped up, because our initial draft budget was on an understanding that Three Waters was proceeding. So, Ross, can you just take us through what in brief, don't want the long version, what Watercare presented to us and how different it is to an environment with three waters, and do we have room to actually explain the difference between the three waters environment and the current environment in that narrative? And also understand they're reviewing the IGCs, and now that's the infrastructure growth charges, and they're also looking at a more localised local growth charge. But my primary question is the 25.8 versus what I thought was 2%.
Hey, before you answer it, there's no great point in explaining three waters. It's dead.
Didn't ask for explanation. That wasn't, so that's not what I'm asking for. I think Ross has got it.
I mean, the short answer around why is the price going up 25%? It is because Watercare, as part of the council group, which is the status quo with current legislation and until there was any kind of change for water reform, the current status quo is that Watercare is part of the group, and the group has got one overall debt to revenue ratio. So we have a debt constraint, part of our debt to revenue limit, and so to meet that debt to revenue limit, we need to, for Watercare to be able to deliver a large capex program, which they view as they need to do that. The revenue has to match and be consistent with the debt. So what Watercare presented is a range of different possibilities around revenue and debt and capex as part of preparing the budget. What the meal proposal ultimately put forward was capping Watercare's debt to revenue at 340%, which means that the overall group debt to revenue could stay within the 270% limit. So that's kind of the problem, that with Watercare as part of the council group, there is a debt constraint on them. So you really get into a choice then around, do you reduce capex or do you increase price? The view from the Watercare board is, reducing capex is not acceptable given the demands on Auckland's water infrastructure. And so the only way to accommodate that capex and stay within the debt to revenue ratio is as a higher price increase. So that is explained a little bit in the financial settings part of the CD, and it's expanded on in the underlying financial strategy. So that is the reason for it that's there. In the financial strategy, it also talks about future things, discussions with government, and engagement with government on water reform has the potential to shift that equation if there was a different financial model and Watercare were not part of the council group balance sheet. We'll then have a range of different options, and maybe we could find ways to invest in more water infrastructure without relying so heavily on the prices. So there's a little bit of information in here. There's more in the supporting information. I guess the only other point I'd make is the key point of consultation here is around rates increases and the spend that's funded by rates and council debt. The decision around water prices is a decision for the Watercare board. It's not a key part of this, what you're asking and seeking feedback on through this plan. It is important context, and it's included in the information.
Okay, so
Through the chair, sorry, Councillor Abbey, I just want to point out that on page 35, this is the Part 4 Council Services. There is a section on water where there is some narrative there around the changes to legislation, around what Watercare delivers, some information around those price increases, and kind of giving a bit more context. So that is page 35 in Part 4.
okay, thanks. Look, I think it's important to explain, if it was 2% under the former legislation and 25.8 now is pretty relevant, but I don't think many people will actually find that level of detail, but that's not a criticism of you guys. I think I'll come back to the port questions once I've got my papers organised here.
The tricky part about this whole thing is we're publishing an LTP for consultation during a time in which there are active decisions being made at central government which impact on as we go through. It may well be that we have solved the Watercare charge issue before the end of this. So there'll be continual release of further information. So we're consulting on 10 years of stuff during a moving environment. and that's particularly one of the items. I've got Councillor Turner next, please.
Thank you. The future fund, we've got 1.267 billion of savings for depreciation offsetting debt. The future fund's going to pay us, or the aim is for it to pay us more than the cost of interest. Can we not prime the future fund with our depreciation offset funding, with our 100% depreciation money?
So I think the depreciation savings you're referring to is the fact that we've used rates and other income to fund asset renewals rather than relying on debt. So there is no money sitting around available for that. We could borrow a whole lot of extra money. We could borrow $1 billion or more and put it into a future fund. But I guess our advice is, why would you do that? That would probably not be a prudent course of action.
Sorry, so that's the first time. I've been hammering on for months about the fact that there is 1.267 billion showed in our expenditure as funding of depreciation, and they were aiming for 100%, and I've been saying, where's the money? And you've been saying it's offsetting debt, and I've been saying it's not there because our debt keeps growing. So I now ask, can we take, you said with this future fund that it would give us a better return than debt. You're now telling me that funding of depreciation is not available because we actually have to borrow to get it back. Is that right?
What we're saying is that if we had a different policy around how we fund depreciation, if we hadn't been funding any depreciation, then right now you'd have 1.2 billion more debt over and above the debt you already have. So you don't have that. You don't have this additional debt. Yeah. So it's not money that's available. It's debt that additional debt that has been avoided.
I fully understand that, and it's the first time that you turned the argument around in this manner when we've discussed it. We even had a meeting about this. So we have got right now $1.267 billion more debt than it shows, because the debt we talk about is adjusted by the money we supposedly have put aside for funding depreciation. Correct?
I'm afraid we're missing the question here. The context on depreciation is it's used to fund capital. So there's no hidden box where we keep depreciation. It's one of the funding sources because it creates an operating surplus. We use that for capital investment. If we were fully funding depreciation, we'd have more of it and we could fund more of the capital assets. To the extent that we're not fully funding depreciation, that means that our capital works are not funded by as much operating surplus, so we have to borrow more. I think that's the circle that completes depreciation.
Thank you. So please bear with me a little bit because I have trouble understanding some of this stuff. I was told, when I was told we were fully funding depreciation and we're aiming for that in another couple of years, I asked where's the money coming from, and I was told it's coming from rates, correct?
Correct, that's money we collect from rates and other revenue, other current revenue, and we use that to fund capital investment.
And it's shown in our expenditure, it's shown in our budget, it's shown in the expenditure column as 1.267 billion, and I've asked for ages, where is it in the asset? Because in my little world of a small businessman, I see a pot of money that I'm putting this stuff into each week to fully fund depreciation. And I've been told, oh no, it's been put against debt because we're going to save interest by putting it against debt. Now I'm saying you've got a long-term future fund, which you're talking about putting asset into because it's going to return better than debt. And I'm saying, why don't we just take that 1.267 billion that we've got in borrowings, offsetting interest, and put it in the fund, because it'll pay us better, by 1% or 2% maybe only. And you're telling me the money's not there because, have I got this right? What am I not understanding?
No, I think there's a number of things that are conflated in there, unfortunately. Depreciation is currently targeted towards funding capital expenditure. If we were to not use it to fund capital expenditure and to put it into a future fund, then debt would increase by the entire amount of that depreciation, and that's not something that's been consulted on.
Okay, thank you. So the next thing is then that in those documents, when I sort of read through page hundreds and hundreds, it basically, as far as I read it, says that the future fund is really a check account, because what is capable of triggering us taking money out of it was almost anything, as far as I could read. Is that, this future fund, we've been told in these discussions that the future fund is there for a rainy day, so we can pull off it when we want to. And when I read through the stuff of how the future fund could be activated or gone into, it was very open. Am I right?
Through you, Chair, I'll try and take this one. So the fund, as I talked about, it's likely to have a portion allocated to providing more self-insurance, so reduce our insurance premiums. It's also going to be available there for liquidity purposes, and what I mean by that is that if we did have another global financial crisis and we needed to access money quickly and we couldn't access debt markets, we could use it for that. And also it's there for future climate resilience. Now that again is yet to be fully defined, but it means it can be put towards future capital initiatives which do benefit us from climate change in the future.
Thank you, if I may. So if we're self-funding insurance, that again is taking income money and putting it aside as our own self-insurance. Is that right? So that if we write off a car downstairs, we can go into that fund and replace the car. Is that how it works?
Through you, Chair, the fund there is really for the more or the substantial events like we saw with the floods and the cyclone. Things like motor vehicles and that sort of thing are covered through.
I kind of get that, but I was just trying to make a point. Let's go back to my point, which is the same as the fully funding of depreciation. We get money coming in, we lodge it in the books as an expenditure, and then we save it away to use when we need it, ring-fenced. And in this case, we're talking about self-insurance fund. So self-insurance means that you actually put money aside or take the risk yourself. You don't pay insurance premiums, correct?
Through you, Chair, that's correct, but we're not advocating here full self-insurance. We're putting forward a suggestion where we're going to take an element of self-insurance and still use external markets for some aspects of insurance.
All I'm trying to work out is where the dollars are going and why couldn't, how many millions worth of self-insurance are we aiming to carry? What's the risk proportion we're deciding to carry?
Again, through your Chair, as I explained earlier, the current thoughts is that the above and below ground property program is where we get most bang for the buck. And at this stage, we're contemplating taking up to $500 million of risk under each policy. So 2 policies times $500 million, around about $1 billion of risk, with the rest externally insured.
And so are we going to try to fund that like we fund depreciation by saying here's an expenditure in the outgoings, and are we going to say we've got a pool of money sitting aside that we can draw on if there was a
Through you, Chair, yes, I mean this future fund in its totality will be a pool of funds made up of diversified investments in stocks and bonds and other things.
Sorry, you've just jumped over. You've just said there that that's going to be asset money. We're going to sell assets, liquidate the money, put it in that fund so we can get to it. I'm asking, are we funding our self-insurance in the same way as we're funding depreciation? Are we going to take debt? Are we going to take rate dollars and ring fence them as our insurance safeguard, as our self-funding of insurance?
I'm sorry, the question doesn't make sense. We can't answer that because we don't understand the perspective from which you're coming. If we could reframe the question, that might help.
Okay, I'll do my best, and if you could help me because I have trouble with this, that would be appreciated. Let's go back to the start of what I'm trying to say. We have got $1.267 billion worth of depreciation, funding of depreciation, but that money is sitting against debt, right?
Through you, I think we're getting confused across concepts here. What I might do is take this offline. There's some quite useful graphs that we produce which shows you how we do fund our capital expenditure, and it shows the impact of us going to fully funding depreciation and how that reduces our reliance on debt as we to fund additional capex. That might explain some of these concepts that we're trying to get across.
Can I suggest we also use the investor pack to show those funding flows and the investment requirements, because that will really help too.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I sit here as just a member of the public who's been sent here to sort of bring their message and listen. And I look through all this paperwork, and what I see is us not facing reality. But I realise now that I'm straying into this, I need to go into debate for this. When we get to debate, I'll make my comment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, I'm quite happy to have a chat with you. I get the problem you're grappling with, and I've seen it before.
Lots of people have chatted with me for many times, Mr. Mayor, and we keep coming back to the same point.
Yeah, but depreciation is a widely misunderstood subject. You're not alone in that. I've sat through board members and boards, hospital boards, even some professional earnings things. And its use varies depending on what you want to use it for. But in theory, in this case here, an organisation that fully funded depreciation, you set it so that that money is all spent to fund your capital expenditure program. And the capital expenditure program is there to replace things that were there and are wearing out. Now, in this particular case here, we're saying if you don't fund it enough, your debt will keep climbing. There's no question about that. You'll be borrowing every year. What they're talking about here is taking some of the assets which we've got which don't perform particularly well and putting them in something that will perform a bit better. And they'll use some of that performing a bit better money to fund some things like the annual cost of insurance. And insurance is going rocketing up. It's not going to be far to see. The troubles of the insurance companies, it may well be that the only insurance people can get is self-insurance before too long. I don't imagine the insurance companies are going to want to insure people on cliffs. I certainly wouldn't. And so, over a beer, I'll have a crack at that between now and then. But I can assure you, having read the document, it's not unreasonable. It's quite fair. And it sort of gets it. But misunderstanding depreciation is a widespread thing. In some cases where you've got sufficient profits, you use a share of your profits to fund your capital gains, and you use depreciation as a thing to avoid tax. It's kind of two different things. In this case, we're not doing that. Depreciation here funds capital expenditure, and if we don't, because we haven't funded all of our depreciation, we could have either reduced capital expenditure and run everything down, and there's evidence to show that we've done that, particularly with roading, or we've just carried on borrowing. And we just can't carry on borrowing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that. I don't think I misunderstand depreciation. I misunderstand the 665 words that go around it in this case. What I heard you outline there was us just frittering down our asset base to pay the bills and not face the real fix. But thank you for that. I will have a beer with you sometime. Thank you.
Well, I've got to the end of questions, unless, of course, there's the irrepressible person who can't wait until the very last minute to put their hands up. In which case, I've got Councillor Williamson and Councillor Lee and Councillor Darby. Does anyone mind if we just take 5 minutes just for a plumbing stop? We've had 1 hour and 40 minutes of this, so I'm just going to stop. I'm going to come back and ask Councillor Williamson to ask a question, but I'm just giving you 5 minutes if that's all right. Thank you.